Education is the living arena where ideas meet belief, where thought learns to clothe itself in expression, and where the unseen currents of society shape the minds that will one day shape the world. Within this arena, social topics arise not as interruptions, but as signals, calling attention to what is ready to be understood, healed, or transformed. Debate, in this sense, is not conflict but movement, a stirring of awareness that invites students and educators alike to recognize the power of thought and the responsibility that accompanies it. Debates over social topics in education reflect the understanding that ideas are forces. When a classroom opens itself to questions of justice, equality, culture, identity, or responsibility, it opens a channel through which clarity may replace confusion and fear may dissolve into insight. Each spoken thought sets something into motion, and each attentive listener participates in the creation of meaning. Education then becomes more than the transfer of information. It becomes a conscious practice of shaping inner attitudes that later express themselves as action in the world. Social debates in educational spaces ask learners to look beyond memorized facts and to recognize the invisible beliefs that govern behavior. They reveal how deeply ideas influence opportunity, harmony, and progress. When students are encouraged to engage thoughtfully with differing perspectives, they learn that disagreement does not diminish truth but refines it. The mind, when trained to listen without resistance, discovers that wisdom often arrives through contrast, and understanding grows when judgment is released. In this environment, education acts as a mirror, reflecting both the collective challenges of society and the individual beliefs each learner carries. Discussions on social issues become opportunities to recognize limiting patterns of thought and replace them with principles that support unity and growth. The classroom transforms into a place where students learn that their thoughts are creative, that words have consequence, and that awareness is the first step toward meaningful change. Debates over social topics also remind educators of their role as guides rather than controllers of thought. By holding space for respectful inquiry, they affirm that truth is not imposed but realized. Such dialogue cultivates confidence, empathy, and discernment, qualities that cannot be tested by examinations, yet determine the direction of lives and communities. When education embraces open discussion, it honors the intelligence of the learner and the wisdom inherent in shared exploration. As society continues to evolve, the presence of social debate in education signals readiness for higher understanding. It acknowledges that learning is dynamic, and that students are not empty vessels but conscious participants in the unfolding of ideas. Through thoughtful debate, education aligns thought with purpose, inviting each mind to recognize its influence and to engage with social realities from a place of clarity, responsibility, and inner authority. In such exchanges, curiosity awakens, assumptions soften, and awareness expands, allowing education to function as a living conversation where social questions illuminate values, challenge inherited thinking, and continuously invite students to perceive life through deeper understanding together. Education as a space for conscious dialogue on social issues. Education as a space for conscious dialogue on social issues begins with the recognition that learning is not limited to books, exams, or fixed answers, but is a living process that unfolds through awareness, reflection, and exchange. A classroom is not merely a physical room. It is a field of thought where ideas circulate, take root, and grow. When education allows space for conscious dialogue, it acknowledges that students arrive not only with curiosity, but with beliefs shaped by family, culture, media, and personal experience. These beliefs, often unexamined, quietly influence how individuals see the world and their place within it. Conscious dialogue brings these inner patterns to the surface, where they can be observed, questioned, and refined. Social issues naturally arise in education because society itself is present within every learner. Questions of fairness, opportunity, identity, responsibility, and coexistence are not abstract concepts but lived realities. When such topics are ignored, education risks becoming disconnected from life. When they are approached with awareness, education becomes a bridge between inner understanding and outer action. Conscious dialogue does not seek to force agreement, it seeks clarity. It invites students to speak not from reaction but from thoughtfulness, and to listen not with defense but with openness. In this space, Words are not weapons but tools for insight. Creating education as a space for conscious dialogue requires an atmosphere of trust. Students must feel that their voices are valued and that questioning is not a threat, but a strength. This sense of safety allows honest expression to emerge, and honesty is the doorway to learning. When learners feel seen and heard, they become willing to explore perspectives beyond their own. Dialogue then becomes an act of mutual discovery rather than a contest of opinions. Each contribution adds another layer of understanding, revealing that truth often appears through collective reflection rather than individual certainty. Conscious dialogue also teaches students to recognize the power of thought. Every idea, discussed in an educational setting, carries energy. It influences attitudes, emotions, and future decisions. By engaging with social topics thoughtfully, learners begin to understand that their inner conversations shape their outer experiences. They learn that reacting unconsciously to social issues often perpetuates division, while responding with awareness opens the way to resolution. Education, in this sense, becomes training for the mind, guiding it to choose understanding over assumption and compassion over judgment. In such a learning environment, disagreement is not feared. Instead, it is seen as a sign that deeper exploration is possible. Conscious dialogue allows opposing views to exist without hostility, teaching students that difference does not equal danger. This realization is essential in a diverse society, where cooperation depends on the ability to engage respectfully with varied perspectives. Through dialogue, students learn to separate ideas from identity, understanding that questioning a viewpoint does not mean rejecting a person. This skill nurtures emotional intelligence and social maturity, qualities essential for meaningful participation in the world. Education as conscious dialogue also shifts the role of the educator. Rather than acting solely as an authority who delivers knowledge, the educator becomes a facilitator of awareness. This role involves guiding discussion, encouraging reflection, and modeling respectful communication. When educators approach social topics with balance and openness, they demonstrate that wisdom lies not in having all the answers, but in asking the right questions. Their presence sets the tone for dialogue, reminding students that learning is a shared journey rather than a one-sided transmission. Within this framework, students begin to see themselves as active contributors to knowledge, their experiences and insight. TAs are recognized as valuable elements of the learning process. This recognition builds confidence and a sense of responsibility. Learners understand that their words matter, that dialogue shapes collective understanding, and that silence can be as influential as speech. As they engage with social issues, they develop the ability to articulate their thoughts clearly and to refine them through interaction with others. Conscious dialogue in education also encourages self-awareness. When students express their views and hear them reflected back through discussion, they gain insight into their own thinking patterns. They may notice assumptions they were unaware of, or emotions that influence their opinions. This awareness is transformative, as it empowers individuals to choose their responses rather than be driven by habit. Education thus becomes a practice of inner alignment, where thought, feeling, and expression come into harmony. By embracing social dialogue consciously, education prepares students for life beyond the classroom. The world is filled with complex issues that cannot be solved through memorization alone. It requires minds trained in listening, reflection, and thoughtful response. When education nurtures these abilities, it equips learners not just with information, but with wisdom. Dialogue becomes a rehearsal for citizenship, leadership, and cooperation, allowing students to engage with society from a place of understanding rather than fear. In this space of conscious dialogue, education fulfills a deeper purpose. It becomes a means of awakening awareness, revealing the interconnectedness of individual thought and collective reality. Social topics are no longer seen as distractions from learning, but as invitations to deeper insight. Through open exchange, students learn that growth occurs when ideas are explored with sincerity and respect. The classroom transforms into a living conversation where awareness expands, understanding deepens, and minds learn to move beyond limitation into clearer perception of self and society. The role of debate in shaping beliefs and awareness. The role of debate in shaping beliefs and awareness begins with the recognition that human thought is a living force, constantly influencing the way we perceive the world and interact with others. Debate is not merely an exercise in argumentation or a competition to see who can present the most convincing position. It is a sacred space where ideas meet consciousness, where beliefs are brought into the light to be examined, tested, and refined. In educational settings, debates over social topics function as catalysts for growth, offering students the opportunity to witness the power of thought in action, and to understand that every perspective carries energy and meaning. When students engage in debate, they are not simply defending opinions, they are learning to observe their own inner convictions, recognize assumptions, and refine understanding through dialogue with others. Beliefs are rarely formed in isolation. From the earliest stages of life, individuals absorb ideas from family, culture, society, and personal experiences. Many of these beliefs operate beneath conscious awareness, influencing behavior and perception without scrutiny. Debate, when conducted thoughtfully, brings these hidden assumptions into the conscious mind, allowing learners to evaluate them. By engaging in social discussions, students begin to recognize the difference between conditioned thought and deliberate choice. They realize that beliefs are not fixed. They can be shaped, clarified, and aligned with higher understanding. In this way, debate becomes a tool for self-awareness as much as for intellectual engagement. Awareness grows as students are encouraged to listen as intently as they speak. In the process of debate, hearing opposing viewpoints requires patience, empathy, and openness. Students discover that listening deeply is not passive, but an active engagement with the energy of thought. Every perspective offers insight, even if it contradicts one's own position. Through this careful attention, learners cultivate discernment, the ability to separate truth from assumption and opinion from understanding. They begin to recognize that awareness is not about winning an argument, but about perceiving the nuances of ideas and the patterns of thinking that shape responses. The process of debate also highlights the creative power of language. Words are not neutral, they carry vibration, influence thought, and affect perception. When students articulate their viewpoints, they are exercising a form of creative expression that shapes both inner and outer reality. The act of choosing words with care, framing ideas with clarity, and responding with presence teaches responsibility. Students learn that careless speech reinforces confusion or conflict, whereas thoughtful expression fosters clarity, understanding, and cooperation. Debate, therefore, is a practice in conscious communication, where language becomes a vehicle for awareness rather than merely a tool for persuasion. Debates over social topics in education also function as mirrors, reflecting the beliefs, values, and biases of both participants and society. When issues of equity, justice, identity, or responsibility arise, they illuminate areas where thought is limited or conditioned. Students are given the opportunity to examine not only the topic at hand but also their own reactions to it. This reflective process nurtures critical thinking, allowing learners to move beyond surface judgments and to explore the underlying principles that guide behavior. They begin to see how their beliefs influence actions, how assumptions shape choices, and how awareness transforms interaction with the world. The educator's role in shaping belief and awareness through debate is essential. Teachers do not dictate conclusions. Instead, they create an environment that nurtures inquiry, curiosity, and respect. By guiding discussion, asking probing questions, and modeling balanced engagement, educators show students how to approach ideas with discernment and openness. They demonstrate that belief is not a rigid possession, but a living force that responds to attention and thought. Through skillful facilitation, students are encouraged to explore ideas deeply, to question assumptions, and to align understanding with clarity rather than opinion or impulse. Debate also cultivates emotional intelligence, which is inseparable from awareness. Students learn to recognize the emotions that arise during disagreement, to distinguish between personal feelings and the energy of ideas, and to respond with equanimity rather than reactivity. This emotional awareness strengthens the mind's capacity to engage with complex social topics without being overwhelmed. Learners discover that conflict need not be destructive. When approached with presence and understanding, it becomes a tool for growth, a way to refine beliefs and deepen insight. Through repeated practice, students come to understand that beliefs are not static statements, but dynamic living forces that can expand or contract depending on attention, reflection, and dialogue. Debate trains the mind to observe itself, to test assumptions, and to align thinking with principles that support understanding, cooperation, and responsibility. It transforms education from passive reception into active engagement, where awareness is the guiding principle and thought is the instrument of creation. Engaging in debate over social topics also prepares students for the broader currents of life. Society is composed of diverse perspectives, conflicting interests, and continuous change. A mind trained in thoughtful dialogue and critical awareness is equipped to navigate these complexities with clarity, integrity, and discernment. Students learn that the power of debate lies not in defeating others, but in illuminating truth, expanding understanding, and fostering insight. Through debate, education becomes a living laboratory for consciousness, where beliefs are clarified, awareness is expanded, and the mind learns to operate with deliberate intelligence in both personal and social realms. Respectful exchange of diverse perspectives in classrooms. Respectful exchange of diverse perspectives in classrooms is a fundamental principle that transforms education from a mere transmission of information into a living practice of understanding, empathy, and collective growth. Classrooms are microcosms of society, where students arrive with varying experiences, beliefs, and cultural backgrounds. When diversity is recognized and embraced, the learning environment becomes rich with possibilities for insight, creativity, and transformation. Respectful exchange is not simply about politeness or adherence to rules. It is an active engagement in which each voice is acknowledged as carrying value, and each perspective contributes to the development of collective awareness. Diversity in thought, culture, and experience provides a fertile ground for exploration. Students bring to the classroom stories and beliefs shaped by family, community, media, and personal reflection. Each perspective offers a window into a different way of seeing the world, and when these perspectives are shared openly and respectfully, they expand the boundaries of understanding. Respectful exchange encourages learners to listen with intent, to absorb wit, tout immediate judgment, and to consider viewpoints that may challenge their own. This practice cultivates humility, patience, and an appreciation for the complexity of human experience. When students engage with diverse perspectives, they begin to recognize the subtle ways in which assumptions and biases shape thought. Classroom dialogue becomes a mirror, reflecting not only the ideas being discussed, but also the internal filters through which each student interprets them. Through respectful conversation, learners learn to distinguish between opinion and fact, reaction and reflection, assumption and insight. They become aware of the limitations of their own thinking and are invited to expand their understanding by integrating new ideas into their worldview. This process nurtures critical thinking, self-awareness, and the ability to navigate complexity with discernment. Respectful exchange also creates an atmosphere of psychological safety, where students feel empowered to speak authentically without fear of ridicule or dismissal. This sense of security encourages participation from all members, including those who may be shy, uncertain, or hesitant. When each voice is honored, learning becomes inclusive, and the classroom transforms into a space where insight is co-created rather than imposed. Educators play a key role in fostering this environment by modeling respect, demonstrating active listening, and guiding dialogue in ways that emphasize understanding rather than debate alone. The practice of respectful exchange trains students to engage with conflict constructively. Differences of opinion are inevitable in any group, especially when social topics are discussed. Rather than allowing disagreement to devolve into tension or hostility, students learn to approach opposing views with curiosity and discernment. They begin to see that disagreement is not a threat, but an opportunity for deeper exploration and understanding. By engaging with others respectfully, learners develop emotional intelligence, the ability to regulate responses, and the skill of communicating with clarity and sensitivity. Language plays a pivotal role in this process. Words carry energy, intention, and meaning, and the way ideas are expressed influences the outcome of dialogue. Respectful exchange emphasizes mindful communication, where statements are clear, precise, and considerate. Students learn to frame arguments in ways that convey understanding rather than attack, to ask questions that invite reflection rather than provoke defensiveness, and to listen actively with the goal of comprehension rather than rebuttal. Through this practice, language becomes a tool for connection, insight, and transformation. Diverse perspectives also illuminate areas of social awareness and responsibility. When students discuss topics related to justice, equality, identity, and community, they encounter viewpoints shaped by lived experience and societal context. Respectful exchange allows learners to step outside their personal perspective and consider the broader implications of social issues. This engagement fosters empathy, broadens moral understanding, and nurtures a sense of responsibility toward others. Students begin to recognize that their words and actions ripple beyond the classroom, influencing community and society in subtle and significant ways. Educators guide this process by cultivating reflective thinking and conscious attention. They encourage students to observe their own responses, notice emotional reactions, and question underlying assumptions. In doing so, educators help learners move beyond surface-level engagement toward deeper awareness. The classroom becomes a laboratory of consciousness, where thought, reflection, and dialogue combine to shape understanding, clarify values, and refine judgment. Through continuous practice, students internalize the principles of respect, openness, and discernment, which then extend naturally into their interactions outside of school. The respectful exchange of diverse perspectives is also a training ground for creative problem-solving. When multiple viewpoints are considered and integrated, solutions emerge that are richer, more nuanced, and more inclusive. Students learn that collaboration does not require uniformity, and that innovation often arises from the intersection of differing ideas. Through dialogue, they develop the ability to synthesize information, evaluate alternatives, and make choices informed by insight rather than impulse. By valuing every voice, education nurtures the understanding that knowledge is not a static possession of a few, but a living, evolving force, co-created by all participants. Respectful exchange strengthens social cohesion, encourages intellectual curiosity, and cultivates wisdom. Students learn that engagement with others is not about domination or victory, but about growth, understanding, and the refinement of thought. Classrooms thus become spaces where consciousness is expanded, awareness is deepened, and learners acquire the inner tools to navigate a complex world with clarity, empathy, and discernment, preparing them to participate consciously in society. Developing critical thinking through social discussions. Developing critical thinking through social discussions is one of the most essential aspects of modern education, for it transforms learning from passive absorption into active exploration. Critical thinking is the ability to observe, analyze, and evaluate information in a conscious, discerning manner, and social discussions provide a living laboratory for its cultivation. When students engage with social topics, they encounter ideas that challenge assumptions, reveal unseen perspectives, and illuminate the complexity of human behavior and society. In these interactions, the mind learns to move beyond simple acceptance of information and begins to inquire, question, and synthesize knowledge in a way that nurtures independent thought and deeper understanding. Social discussions serve as mirrors in which students see not only the ideas being presented, but also their own responses, biases, and patterns of reasoning. Every reaction offers insight into underlying beliefs and assumptions that may have gone unnoticed. When learners are encouraged to articulate their thoughts, defend their viewpoints, and listen to alternative perspectives, they engage in a process that strengthens discernment and the ability to differentiate between opinion, fact, and inference. Through repeated engagement in such discussions, students develop a keen sense of observation, learning to detect inconsistencies, evaluate evidence, and construct arguments grounded in logic rather than impulse or habit. Critical thinking in social contexts requires courage and openness. Learners must be willing to confront ideas that challenge their existing beliefs and to explore topics that may feel uncomfortable or unfamiliar. This willingness fosters intellectual flexibility, allowing the mind to move fluidly between perspectives rather than becoming rigidly attached to a single point of view. As students practice this flexibility, they begin to recognize that disagreement is not a threat, but an opportunity for learning. They understand that ideas are living forces that can be examined, refined, or released according to the clarity of perception, rather than defended blindly or rejected out of habit. Engagement in social discussions also strengthens the ability to communicate effectively. Critical thinking is not complete without the capacity to express insight clearly and listen actively. As students discuss topics such as justice, equality, cultural differences, and responsibility, they practice articulating their understanding in ways that are coherent, persuasive, and respectful. They learn that language is a tool that shapes perception and influences thought, and that careful choice of words can clarify meaning rather than obscure it. Through dialogue, learners discover that their ability to think critically is intertwined with their ability to convey ideas and to interpret the ideas of others with accuracy and empathy. The process of critical thinking in social discussions is further enhanced by the exposure to diverse viewpoints. Each student brings a unique lens shaped by personal experience, cultural background, and social context. When these lenses intersect in thoughtful dialogue, learners gain insight into the multiplicity of human experience. They learn that complexity is a natural aspect of social reality, and that understanding requires patience, reflection, and the ability to integrate multiple perspectives. Exposure to differing viewpoints challenges assumptions, reveals blind spots, and expands awareness, fostering a mindset that is both analytical and inclusive. Critical thinking also cultivates self-awareness and introspection. As students engage with social topics, they become more conscious of how emotions, values, and prior experiences shape their judgments. They learn to observe inner reactions without immediate identification, recognizing that thoughtful evaluation requires both attention and detachment. This self-reflective aspect of critical thinking allows learners to act from clarity rather than impulse, to respond rather than react, and to align choices with conscious understanding rather than inherited assumptions. Educators play a crucial role in guiding this development. By facilitating discussions that are balanced, structured, and inclusive, teachers model the principles of critical inquiry. They encourage students to examine evidence, question sources, and analyze reasoning while maintaining respect for differing viewpoints. The educator's guidance ensures that critical thinking is not merely a theoretical skill but a lived practice, integrated into the dynamics of conversation, reflection, and application. Through thoughtful facilitation, the classroom becomes a space where curiosity is nurtured, discernment is sharpened, and understanding deepens. Social discussions also teach students to evaluate the ethical and societal implications of ideas. Critical thinking is not solely about logic. It is also about understanding the consequences of thought and action within a social context. When learners discuss issues of fairness, responsibility, and social justice, they are invited to consider the broader impact of beliefs and decisions. They learn that critical thinking involves weighing not only the validity of ideas, but also their relevance, application, and alignment with principles that support human well-being and harmonious coexistence. Through continuous practice, students develop the ability to approach problems methodically and creatively. Critical thinking nurtures the capacity to break complex issues into smaller components, to examine connections and patterns, and to propose solutions grounded in insight rather than assumption. Social discussions provide the context for these skills to flourish, as learners navigate scenarios that require reasoning, empathy, and reflection. They discover that true understanding arises from engagement rather than avoidance, from inquiry rather than passive reception, and from the willingness to consider multiple dimensions of a problem. For forming a judgment, developing critical thinking through social discussions also prepares students for the unpredictability of life beyond the classroom. Society presents challenges that are rarely simple or uniform, requiring the ability to assess situations, weigh options, and act with wisdom. Through dialogue on social issues, learners cultivate the mental agility, awareness, and discernment necessary to navigate complex realities. They understand that knowledge is not static, that understanding evolves through engagement, and that the practice of critical thinking is a continuous journey of refinement and expansion. As students immerse themselves in respectful and thoughtful discussion of social topics, they discover that critical thinking is both a personal and collective endeavor. It strengthens individual insight while contributing to shared understanding, encouraging collaboration, reflection, and mutual growth. By examining ideas, questioning assumptions, and integrating diverse perspectives, learners develop the intellectual tools to engage consciously with the world. The classroom, in this way, becomes a laboratory for cultivating minds capable of discernment, insight, and thoughtful action, preparing students to participate with clarity, responsibility, and awareness in the broader society around them. Responsibility of educators in guiding open-minded inquiry. Responsibility of educators in guiding open-minded inquiry is a cornerstone of meaningful education, for it transforms the classroom into a space where learning is not merely the absorption of facts, but the cultivation of consciousness. Educators hold a unique role as facilitators, guides, and models of inquiry, shaping not only what students know, but how they engage with ideas, think critically, and perceive the world. The responsibility lies not in controlling thought or dictating in swerves, but in creating an environment where curiosity is nurtured, questions are honored, and students are empowered to explore, reflect, and arrive at understanding through their own reasoning. This approach recognizes that every learner brings a distinctive perspective, shaped by personal experience, cultural background, and innate curiosity, and that education flourishes when these perspectives are respected and integrated into the dialogue of learning. Guiding open-minded inquiry begins with creating a classroom atmosphere of trust and psychological safety. Students must feel confident that their ideas will be received with consideration rather than judgment, that their questions are valued, and that uncertainty is not a flaw but a natural stage in the process of discovery. When learners feel safe to express their thoughts, they are more willing to explore unfamiliar concepts, challenge assumptions, and engage deeply with complex topics. This atmosphere fosters intellectual courage, allowing students to move beyond rote memorization and passive acceptance toward active, thoughtful engagement with ideas. The educator's role is to maintain this environment consistently, modeling respectful interaction and demonstrating the value of curiosity, attentiveness, and thoughtful reflection. Educators also carry the responsibility of modeling open-mindedness themselves. Students observe not only the content of teaching, but the manner in which it is delivered, absorbing attitudes, behaviors, and approaches toward learning. When an educator demonstrates curiosity, humility, and willingness to explore multiple perspectives, learners internalize these qualities as integral to their own educational practice. Modeling open-minded inquiry involves acknowledging the limits of one's own knowledge, being receptive to questions that challenge established ideas, and showing that learning is a continuous collaborative journey rather than a fixed set of instructions. This modeling creates a living example of inquiry in action, guiding students to approach knowledge with attentiveness, discernment, and respect. The responsibility of educators extends to structuring learning experiences that cultivate inquiry. Social topics, in particular, provide fertile ground for developing skills of observation, analysis, and thoughtful response. When discussing issues such as justice, equity, culture, or identity, students are confronted with multiple viewpoints and the complexity of human experience. Educators facilitate this process by framing questions that encourage deep reflection, guiding discussion in ways that illuminate underlying principles, and helping students to recognize the assumptions and biases that influence thought. In doing so, they transform dialogue from mere conversation into a disciplined practice of inquiry, where each participant learns to think critically, communicate clearly, and listen with genuine attention. Open-minded inquiry requires attention not only to intellectual development, but to emotional intelligence. Educators are responsible for nurturing the capacity of students to engage with ideas without becoming defensive, reactive, or dismissive. Social topics often evoke strong emotions, and the educator's guidance helps learners distinguish between emotional response and thoughtful analysis. By fostering awareness of feelings alongside reflection on ideas, educators enable students to engage holistically, integrating reasoning and empathy. This integration deepens understanding, cultivates respect for differing perspectives, and prepares students to navigate real-world situations with discernment and balance. Responsibility also involves encouraging student autonomy in learning. Open-minded inquiry flourishes when learners are empowered to ask questions, pursue lines of thought, and develop insights independently, supported by the guidance of the educator. Teachers provide structure and direction without imposing rigid conclusions, allowing students to experience the natural consequences of inquiry, discovery, re-evaluation, and growth. This approach cultivates self-confidence, intellectual resilience, and the understanding that knowledge is not a static possession but a living process that evolves through attention, reflection, and dialogue. Educators must also be attuned to the diversity of perspectives within the classroom. Every student carries unique experiences, beliefs, and cultural contexts that influence understanding. The responsibility of the teacher is to recognize and honor these differences, ensuring that discussions remain inclusive and that all voices are heard. When students see their perspectives acknowledged and valued, they are more likely to engage actively and thoughtfully. At the same time, encountering differing viewpoints encourages the development of empathy, critical analysis, and the ability to integrate multiple perspectives into coherent understanding. Educators guide learners in navigating this diversity, helping them to engage with complexity without losing clarity or integrity. Another dimension of responsibility lies in fostering ethical awareness alongside intellectual inquiry. Educators guide students to consider the impact of ideas, decisions, and actions on themselves, their peers, and the broader community. Open-minded inquiry is not merely about exploring possibilities, it is about discerning what aligns with principles of justice, fairness, and collective well-being. Teachers facilitate reflection on the consequences of thought and action, helping students to recognize that knowledge carries both opportunity and responsibility. This integration of ethics and intellect nurtures learners who are not only insightful but conscientious, capable of applying understanding in ways that support harmony and constructive engagement with the world. The educator's role in guiding inquiry also involves cultivating patience and persistence. True understanding emerges gradually through repeated reflection, questioning, and dialogue. Teachers encourage students to tolerate ambiguity, resist the urge for immediate answers, and remain committed to the process of exploration. This patience fosters resilience and nurtures the recognition that mastery is not a destination but a continuous unfolding. Students learn to value the journey of learning itself, appreciating that each question, challenge, and discussion contributes to the development of discernment, clarity, and wisdom. Through consistent practice, educators help students internalize the principles of open-minded inquiry, transforming classrooms into living laboratories of thought. Students learn to approach social topics with curiosity, respect, and analytical awareness. They discover the interplay between belief, perception, and action, recognizing that understanding is both a personal and collective endeavor. In this environment, the mind is trained to observe carefully, the heart is cultivated to respond with empathy, and the spirit of inquiry is nurtured as a guiding force for growth. Responsibility of educators is therefore not limited to conveying information, but extends to shaping the very capacities by which students engage with life, preparing them to navigate complexity, embrace diversity, and participate consciously in the unfolding of society.